Marty Acevedo serves as a co-founder volunteer at Coach Me Strong. She was diagnosed with essential tremor in 2004 and with Parkinson's in 2010. Her symptoms included gait disturbance, dystonia, and REM sleep behavior disorder 10 years prior to her diagnosis. After her progression through the grieving process, Marty decided that her life would not be defined by her diagnosis. She felt called to help others who share this journey and became involved with the Parkinson's Association of San Diego and the Davis Phinney Foundation. Serving as secretary on the board of directors, she targeted her knowledge and passion towards educating others living with Parkinson's, encouraging exercise and socialization, and helping others to find their best life. Marty is most proud of her involvement in the development and implementation of an integrated, medically evidence-based program for people with Parkinson's at a local wellness center. Thank you so much for joining us today, Marty. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen real quick.
Also, there's Diane Belcher is just south of you in Chula Vista.
Yeah, I saw that she's on the call. That's great. Hi, Diane. Can everyone see my screen? Okay.
I think if you go to slideshow.
I'm trying. It's all blocked up top. So there it is. Okay. So we're going to talk about nutrition and Parkinson's today. As I was mentioned, I was diagnosed with essential tremor. The diagnosis of Parkinson's was missed in 2004. So as I mentioned to the others before, I'm a registered dietitian, but didn't know a whole lot about Parkinson's. But since that time, I've kind of become an expert. So today we're going to talk about if there's a particular diet that's recommended for Parkinson's, if nutrition can help with symptoms of Parkinson's, how about the gut microbiome? What about medication, side effects of meds, and then nutritional complications that happen because we have Parkinson's? Most clinicians, most people recommend what's called a Mediterranean diet or lifestyle. I don't like to suggest that diets are appropriate because when you go on a diet, you tend to go off of a diet. Lifestyle is more important because you tend to change the way you live your life. A Mediterranean diet, though, is based mostly on plant-based foods, and we'll talk about why that's important later. But some fish and chicken and other foods, other types of protein are okay. Red meat could be limited to, say, 2 or 3 times a week. Whole grains and pastas because of their fiber, which is really important for those of us with Parkinson's, and B vitamins, as are fresh fruits and vegetables. Nuts, herbs, and spices. You might think that's just because they flavor things and they may make things taste better, especially when we have a decreased sense of smell. But it's really because of their anti-inflammatory responses. Red wine in moderation and with meals. And I'm not saying that everybody should go out and start drinking red wine. If you don't start. But if you do, check with your doctor to make sure that's okay. Dark chocolate, my favorite. And then we're going to talk about exercise, and you'll hear that come up quite a bit because exercise is a very important part of the lifestyle and for us with Parkinson's. So what are phytochemicals and antioxidants? Phytochemicals is just a big word for types of chemicals or properties of things that we are in our foods that might reduce inflammation and help in the immune function. Many people think Parkinson's is a disease of inflammatory response or inflammation. So that's why the plant-based foods are recommended, as are green and black teas. Oh, that's this typo. It's curcumin, which is found in mustard and curry, fiber, garlic, carotenoids, and the B vitamins, beta carotene, your dark yellow, dark, very, very colorful types of vegetables and fruits, and then flavonoids. On the other hand, there's a process in our body that there's a cycle that develops something called free radicals, and those are bad agents that act on the cells of our body and break down the cell walls and cause damage to them. Antioxidants in our diet help to protect the body from the damage that's caused by those free radicals. And those are found in fruits and vegetables, berries and grapes, dark chocolate again, pomegranate, cranberries, and in the deep water fishes and nuts, things like salmon, the fatty fishes. Those types of fishes are good. Something interesting I found several years ago was there's a compound called farnesol that is found in berries, and it's a natural antioxidant. Researchers did a study with this compound and with mice models, which there's a particular type of rat or mice that's used in research that is responds well to being given PD or has PD type symptoms. So these mice were fed a diet high in this compound, and they noticed that they improved their strength and coordination and doubled the number of healthy dopaminergic neurons in their brain. There is 50% increase of a protective protein in the brain. Now, they haven't taken this on and duplicated that result in humans, but it sounds like it might work for us as well, because the PD mice typically translates very readily to what happens in people. So that means that, it's good to eat berries anyway. We all know that the diets that we learned when we were in elementary school had fresh fruits and vegetables at the bottom in that good part of the pyramid. But raspberries, blackberries, strawberries, blueberries, it's, just throw a few in your cereal in the morning or just have throughout the day as a snack. There are a lot of diets that are suggested for Parkinson's, and there's probably none that are bad or none that are awful for you, but there are some that have particular characteristics that might be helpful. Others, there's no particular reason that they would be suggested for PD. So I'm going to go over a few of these, not in detail, but just as an overview. The keto and paleo diets, sometimes recommended as is intermittent fasting, low or no dairy, and the gluten-free diet. Those are all things that I've heard that people try and say that they help. The keto diet we'll talk about in detail just in a minute, but it's very challenging to follow because it's so high in fat. But it could be neuroprotective and it may slow progression. It is deficient in vitamins and minerals and definitely in fiber. And that study was completed on only 5 people, the initial study, and 4 finished. There's been a few studies done since then with similar results. The diet is 92% fat. Think about that. What's your diet going to look like? You'll be eating butterballs and cream cheese and high fat meats, those types of things. No carbs in this diet. There's no carbohydrates at all in this particular diet. It's not like the keto diet that people follow for weight loss, where you can have certain types of carbohydrates. But this one in particular is used for kids with epilepsy or a seizure disorder, and it's very effective in managing that. So does that translate to Parkinson's? It's designed to put body into ketosis. When I worked as a dietitian in a hospital, I worked in the critical care unit. We worked very, very hard to keep the body out of ketosis because it's not something that the kidneys like and the heart doesn't like it particularly. So we try to make sure people are just in their normal state and not in ketosis. There's a thought that the brain uses glucose as its preferred source of energy. But in this particular diet, that switches to ketones, and they're thinking that makes you feel sharper. Your mental status seems more improved in some ways. And then the liver is forced into gluconeogenesis, making more glucose because it's not getting any from the diet. And they think that might have an effect on the formation of alpha-synuclein. There were only a few studies done. As I mentioned, 4 people followed the diet over a period of a month, 28 days, and they had better symptoms. Their symptoms improved. They had less rigidity. Their slowness of movement diminished, their gait improved, and their tremor markedly improved. And that continued for another 28 days. But it's really challenging to follow a diet that's all protein and all fat with no carbs. And as I mentioned, it's deficient in vitamins, minerals, and fiber. Intermittent fasting, that's when most of us fast every day when we're sleeping. If we sleep, we fast. So we fast for, say, 8 hours a day if we're lucky. But the intermittent fasting program suggests that you should fast for 16 to 18 hours a day. So maybe you would start your first meal at 11 a.m. and end your last meal at 7 p.m. It doesn't mean that you eat a lot of food during that time or more food than you would as normal, but that's when you're eating between the 8 hours in that time period. This particular diet seems to impact at a mitochondrial level, and it may reduce neurodegeneration. Some types of Parkinson's are caused by a genetic breakdown at the mitochondrial level. So I'm just thinking out loud, if that is the type of PD that's impacted by this type of a diet plan. But it also can protect against autonomic dysfunction, the things that happen that break down with us in Parkinson's, of the non-motor symptoms, and with cognitive and motor decline. There has been a little bit of controversy suggested about dairy intake, and based on one study that is a longitudinal study that looked at how people have eaten over the period of their lifespan, and they found that low-fat dairy intake led to an onset of Parkinson's, and that there was a correlation between that. Note that that's just a correlation. There was no cause and effect identified, and the study has not been really reproduced. The thought is that perhaps this correlation is because of the feed that was used for the cattle, the dairy cows that produce the milk, and the feed that could have been contaminated with pesticides such as paraquat that we know have a link to Parkinson's. Milk is a very, very important source of protein, vitamins, and calcium. It's pretty much the complete food. So it's not something that I would suggest that if you don't drink milk that you start, but obviously if you do drink milk, don't stop. And there are reasons to think about low-fat dairy intake as far as your cardiac health and other health, because Parkinson's isn't the only thing that's important in our health. There's a lot more research is needed to identify if dairy has a role in Parkinson's. What doesn't have a role in Parkinson's is gluten. Gluten is in wheat and barley, and a lot of people say that if they go on a gluten-free diet, that their symptoms improve. And that may be true for that person, but there is a large placebo effect for people with Parkinson's. So there's the thought that if it's going to work, it will work. But celiac disease is really the only disease or illness that causes a need for a gluten-free diet. And when a person with celiac disease, it's the disease of the gut, when they eat something that's the protein found in wheat, which is gluten, they have serious gastrointestinal issues and they're just miserable, end up in the hospital. So most people with Parkinson's don't benefit from gluten restriction. However, if you have celiac disease, then you would. My theme and my whole practice as a dietitian for, say, almost 40 years now is moderation is key. There's no bad foods. If you'd like to have a donut once in a while, that's fine. Just don't do it every day. If you like other types of foods, it's just important to practice moderation, and that's in all things. So let's talk a little bit about supplements. I would imagine that many people with Parkinson's do take a supplement, whether it's vitamin D or calcium or multiple vitamin or maybe thiamine or some other type of B vitamin, biotin, all those different types of things. There's lots of stuff out there on the internet, and Dr. Google recommends all kinds of different things. Dr. Google doesn't have a medical degree. It's always best to get your nutrients from food. Nutrition and food is probably as complex and complicated as is Parkinson's, because we don't know how everything works together. But the nutrients in foods do work together in a synergistic fashion to make the way that our nutrients work best in our body. The only time that you really need to take any supplement is if you're diagnosed as deficient. And sometimes that can happen with Parkinson's. Some people can become B12 deficient. Many of us are vitamin D deficient because we just don't get out in the sun enough, or we're not exposed to sunlight or foods that contain vitamin D. And then what I suggest for most people, if they really do want to take a supplement, is to take an age-appropriate multivitamin. We take a lot of medication anyway, so why would you want to supplement with other things that you might not need? That's just extra pills. As I mentioned, nutrients work together. There's something called the Krebs cycle that I learned when I was in college, and I actually used it when I was in practice. And people think, wow, well, she must be a real nerd if she used the Krebs cycle, because it's the cycle of metabolism, but it shows how the vitamins come in, the B vitamins come in, and vitamin C come into that cycle and work with potassium and phosphorus and sodium and protein and carbohydrates and fat to break down everything so that it's usable in your cells. If one of those nutrients there's too much of one and not enough another, then that cycle breaks down and things aren't metabolized as effectively. And one other thing is that B vitamins and vitamin C are water soluble. So if you want to take those supplements, go ahead. You'll just pee it out because you have very expensive urine. You won't use what you don't need. You'll only use what you do need, and the rest of it your body will get rid of. However, vitamins A, D, E, and K are fat soluble, so they're stored in the liver. And if you take way too much of that, that can become cumulative and you can run into problems with that. As I mentioned, we may need to supplement with calcium and vitamin D. There's a study actually going on now that supplements vitamin D and then adds a medication to help to see if they can help to prevent fractures from falling for persons with Parkinson's, because that is a real problem. We can tend to fall, especially as our disease progresses, and to get a hip fracture or any type of fracture can lead to really a lot of different complications and lead to our downhill slide. And then I mentioned the B12 supplementation. Other things that are neuroprotective or help to protect our brain, and maybe help with dopamine and maybe delay, maybe is a big word there, may delay the progression towards cognitive issues. That's what neuroprotective is. Fava beans. My husband always says talks about Silence of the Lambs when I mention fava beans, because that's what the criminal referred to was like some fava beans. But it's a natural source of levodopa. However, one cup of fava beans doesn't have the same amount of levodopa as another cup. It's the concentration varies from bean to bean. The quality and the availability of that levodopa is different from each type of fava bean. So you'd have to eat a whole lot of fava beans to be able to get the amount of levodopa that you get from your carbidopa levodopa that you take. And also it won't be administered in a routine fashion. So you'll probably have a lot more on and definitely not more off time. Turmeric, I mentioned before, it can be neuroprotective, and it's found in mustard and curry. Rosemary, same. Soy may be neuroprotective. It's been shown to be neuroprotective in rats because it contains something called genistein. Caffeine is helpful in men and in women after menopause. Green tea, remember I mentioned that earlier, can delay onset of Parkinson's symptoms, could be neuroprotective. Red wine, there's a chemical in red wine and in grapes that appear to be neuroprotective. And then low to moderate intake of beer may reduce risk for Parkinson's, but higher risk increase. So it's like moderation in all things. So there's a lot of press out there and a lot of talk about the gut microbiome and Parkinson's. Does Parkinson's start in the gut or does it start in the brain? And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about the microbiome and inflammation. And this is where the thought that Parkinson's is an inflammatory type disease comes in. There may be a low-grade process that's inflammatory in the gut of those of us with Parkinson's. And this type of environment can lead to increased expression of alpha-synuclein. Alpha-synuclein has been identified as the protein that is problematic in Parkinson's, like tau, and our Alzheimer's alpha-synuclein is what is the bad guy in Parkinson's and can lead to misfolding of that, and then development of Lewy bodies, and that aggregates and can lead to dementia. So the microbiome regulates the inflammatory activity and in the gut and systemically in most people, not so much with us with Parkinson's. What's different is that we have more types of the different types of enzymes, Akkermansia, lactobacillus, and bifidobacterium, that lead to inflammation in the intestines. Those levels are elevated in our gut. They're not in people who don't have Parkinson's. And that change can contribute to differences in how levodopa is absorbed from our guts, and also the way it is effective through the effects on metabolism. If you have problems with your gut microbiome, you may not tolerate, your medication may not be as effective. There's also a decreased abundance of beneficial bacteria that lead to the increase in number of short chain fatty acids. And I think that's the key point here, that can lead to decrease in neuroprotection and increased toxin production. Short chain fatty acids are really important, and they help to regulate our gut microbiome. The short chain fatty acids are formed from a breakdown of insoluble fiber, and then with us, that insoluble fiber doesn't break down so much, so that can cause the decrease in short chain fatty acids. It also can cause an increase in constipation. So there you go. Is it the constipation that's causing the gut microbiome to change, or is the microbiome causing the constipation to occur? There's also pathways that break down proteins more quickly, and they create different things called mucin, which can compromise the cell walls of our intestine and lead to a leaky gut, which means that the bacteria and other things that are formed in your colon can leak out into your bloodstream, and that increases the risk of systemic inflammation. So the two of the microbes that I mentioned, the bifidobacterium and lactobacillus, may produce and metabolize neurotransmitters, and then short chain fatty acids could change the neuron pathways in the gut brain axis. That's the axis that says that the gut is sending signals to the brain to act differently in Parkinson's. And then some bacteria can produce the alpha-synuclein that I mentioned. These may be increased, and in most people with Parkinson's, those tend to misfold in cerebral spinal fluid, and then we know that is currently a biomarker for Parkinson's. What about these short chain fatty acids? They come from the metabolism of fiber. They prevent that translocation, the leaky gut theory that I mentioned. They don't let the bacteria get from the gut into the bloodstream. They can be neuroprotective. They maintain gut integrity. They maintain the viability of the gut wall, and they are anti-inflammatory. So short chain fatty acids are good. How can you get short chain fatty acids? Well, you can get it from the foods that you eat by using non-digestible food fiber and other types of fiber. There are a lot of things that are good food sources for things like probiotics, or you can take prebiotics, and you can buy prebiotics in the store, but you can also get prebiotics from foods like bananas. That's easy to eat. Onions, garlic, and leeks, asparagus, and artichokes. And like I said, just like supplements, the pill form are good. The vitamins and minerals is better to get it from food than from a pill. It's also better to get prebiotics from food rather than taking a supplement, because the we know what's in the food, and it can help. You don't really know how the prebiotics will act in the body, and there's millions of different types of bacteria and other things in prebiotics that we don't know exactly how they're going to act in the body. But even so, these prebiotics help to increase the amount of the good things, the short chain fatty acids in the gut. But there's no clear evidence in any study that says they're helpful in Parkinson's. Probiotics are good bacteria. Probiotics are the live good bacteria. And there, if you take a probiotic supplement, there are millions of different bacteria in that pill or capsule, whatever you might take. They can help to develop a healthy gut microbiome. They contain the bacteria that we're deficient in. It can help with allergies, and it can help with lactose intolerance. Again, the food that we eat is really a better source of probiotics because they're anti-inflammatory. They can help with constipation and motor symptoms, maybe help with gait, balance, and coordination, those gait disturbance things that we experience. But you would have to take a large dose of probiotics, and I'm not inclined to take a large dose of bacteria into my system. You can also get probiotics from yogurt and aged cheeses like cheddar, brie, those types of things. Fermented foods like kimchi, kombucha, pickled vegetables, sauerkraut, but those foods may not make it to the gut for them to be effective. So let's talk about antibiotics. Antibiotics are not they're really great for treating an infection, and they're necessary at times when we get an infection of some sort, not from a virus. That's not going to help a virus, but from a bacterial type infection. But antibiotics are not great for the gut. If you've ever taken an antibiotic like erythromycin, you probably had diarrhea or some type of gastrointestinal problem after that. But some people do recommend a different antibiotic that can restore the normal flora of the gut after it's changed from antibiotic usage. There is a condition that's called H. pylori. It's a bacterial infection in the stomach. It's much more common in Latin America, but people throughout the world get H. pylori, and a third of the people with Parkinson's test positive for H. pylori. If those symptoms are treated, their symptoms improve. So if you're having a lot of stomach issues, GI issues, and you have Parkinson's, you might ask to have be tested for H. pylori. It's a type of an infection in your stomach. It can also contribute to the development of colon cancer, which is also something we should think about. There's some interest in the community with changing your gut microbiome through something called fecal microbiota transplant. And what that does is it involves the transplant of fecal material or stool from a healthy donor to restore more normal bacteria composition in the gut of someone who's receiving that transplant. It's approved for people who have a really bad infection that happens when you have an antibiotic given for some type of infection, and they get refractory, something called C. difficile infection. That's in the gut, and it causes terrible diarrhea and terrible problems for people who have it. The FDA has approved that for those people, and it's helpful. It really does a great job for them. It's usually given via colonoscopy, but there are other ways to do it. You can take it orally or through a enema, different ways to do it. Further research is definitely advised. The latest study showed that there was no true benefit. That was a study that was presented at the World Parkinson's Congress last summer, and the researcher found that there's the largest study that's been done. It's about 50 people. There was no real change in Parkinson's symptoms with this fecal microbiota transplant. There were no change in constipation even. But further research is advised. It could be something called precision medicine, where with people with refractory problems with their gut, they're getting both small bowel obstructions, those types of things. Maybe it would help them. And it might help with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and treating this type of thing where there's more bacteria and it's taking over not just the colon, but the leaky gut goes up into the small intestine, that treating that can improve on time and reduce off time. So that's the story of the gut microbiome. Very briefly, I could go and talk about that for 3 hours and not get through all of it, but that's, I hope, a brief summary that opens the door to more research that you can do on your own. So protein and levodopa. We get asked this question all the time. Do I need to restrict my protein? Do I need to not have take my carbidopa, levodopa at mealtime? What do I need to do? Well, carbidopa, levodopa is absorbed in the small intestine at the same location where protein is absorbed. So there can be some competition between the two. And this can cause problems with off time. That only happens in about 20% of us with Parkinson's. So especially if we're not late stage, it tends to increase the longer we're on carbidopa, levodopa, and the longer we have Parkinson's. Gastroparesis, which is a slowed gastric emptying, where your gut just totally slows down. That's what leads to constipation as well. But the altered absorption of L-DOPA can lead to gastroparesis, which is problematic because then you never get the benefit of the levodopa, so you're always off. You don't get any benefit from carbidopa, levodopa. Please, please, please do not restrict protein. You need that protein as a person with Parkinson's, as a person, who's living their life, because you need the protein to keep yourself healthy, to stay well nourished, and to be able to fight off infections or fractures or trauma of any type that might happen going forward. If it's indicated, talk to your movement disorder neurologist or the neurologist who's responsible for your Parkinson's care to really determine if you need to take the levodopa aside from mealtime. And if so, take it a half hour before or an hour after a meal containing protein. Levodopa will cause nausea. That's why they combine it with carbidopa. But if you're having nausea, take it with a carbohydrate-containing food like fruit, crackers, toast, oatmeal, whatever. And then keep a journal of symptoms and what you're eating. So if you're experiencing more off time, just make a note of when you're eating, what you ate at the time, when you took your medication, and when the off time occurred. And that can help you and your physician determine what's best for you. We're all different. Protein doesn't affect me and my absorption of my medications, but it could very well affect many of you. Many of us lose our sense of smell. It's called hyposmia, and this precedes the prodromal symptom. It precedes other symptoms. It happens 10 to 20 years before the onset of symptoms that are problematic enough that we seek treatment. It happens in about 90% of us. I have an intact sense of smell, which is not normal in most people with Parkinson's. Most of us, though, do lose our sense of smell, which affects our quality of life because when you lose your sense of smell, it's difficult to taste things and you can't alert to things that are abnormal in smell. So it really does impact our quality of life, and it's thought to be related to that alpha-synuclein, that protein, again, in the olfactory or in your nose. Nausea and poor appetite. Poor appetite can occur if you don't have a good sense of smell or taste. You just don't want to eat, so you can become malnourished. But it can also be a factor of medication use. So talk to your movement disorder specialist if you have poor appetite or nausea, if it's from Sinemet, Rytari, or your carbidopa, levodopa. They can add more carbidopa. They can talk about the meal timing, that type of thing, and then there's other alternatives. Or take medications with foods containing carbs, like I mentioned before. Ginger can help. Eating small, more frequent meals 5 or 6 times a day instead of a large meal, or yogurt or peppermint tea can help. Another one of the first symptoms of Parkinson's, well before we're diagnosed, is constipation. And I'm sure many of you know what that feels like and deal with it on a daily basis. Ways you can help with that is to increase fiber in your diet. That's whole grains and fresh fruits and vegetables, those types of things. Making sure you're well hydrated. Consider a fiber supplement that contains a good source of psyllium or non-insoluble fiber. Exercise. I can't emphasize that enough. If you exercise, that keeps things moving, not only on an external basis, but inside your body and your gut. And it can impact, constipation can impact the absorption of your medications, so they don't work as effectively. On the other hand, 25% of us, myself included, have irritable bowel syndrome. And this might be irritable bowel syndrome, constipation, IBS, diarrhea, or a combination of the two. Symptoms of this type of syndrome include pain and discomfort, bloating, as I mentioned, diarrhea and/or constipation, and urgency. So the things you need to do for that are the same thing that you would do for constipation. The Mediterranean diet, you might need to avoid dairy products if you're lactose intolerant, if you notice that you have more symptoms after having cheese on a pizza or drinking milk or having ice cream. So there are supplements for that. You can take a lactase type of thing that helps to break down the lactose or the protein that's found in the protein that's found in dairy products. Limit high fat and high sugar foods. Again, stay hydrated, exercise, and think about practicing mindfulness. Reduce the stress in your life. I mentioned gastroparesis briefly before. It's delayed gastric or stomach emptying, and it can lead to nausea and vomiting, which means you don't tolerate your meds, you don't absorb your medications, you're not absorbing food or nutrients, and you can lead to malnutrition. Trying small, frequent meals can help. Modification of consistency, again, hydration. And there are doctors out there that specialize in neuro problems like constipation, gastroparesis, and other things. They're called neurogastroenterologists. We're lucky to have at least one in our community, and there are many nationwide. So just talk to your neurologist about that and see if you're having real problems with gastroparesis or constipation with small bowel obstructions and other things. A neurogastroenterologist may be helpful to you. NOH is neurogenic orthostatic hypotension. What that means is that because of your Parkinson's and your symptoms, your autonomic symptoms, your blood pressure falls when you stand up from sitting or you sit up from laying down. And it obviously affects your blood pressure. And that can be a real problem because if you get up too quickly, you might feel dizzy, or you might fall, you might faint. And those are real problems for people with Parkinson's. Something that sounds counterintuitive for a dietitian to be telling you to do, but if you have NOH, it's helpful to add salt to your food in cooking or at the table. It can raise your blood pressure by up to 10 points, and that can be enough to manage the symptoms. Another thing that sounds counterintuitive is to maintain good hydration. Make sure you're drinking 2 liters or 8 cups of water or fluids per day. And then again, consider small, frequent meals instead of the typical 3 meals per day. I've mentioned malnutrition many times. That's a major concern for people with Parkinson's, and as a dietitian, it was always something that I tried to identify and help to manage for people, because malnutrition can impact every aspect of your being, and it can lead to decline in health and even to death if not treated. The reason that we are at risk for malnutrition is because we have a decreased appetite, perhaps, maybe related to depression, apathy, constipation, nausea, different symptoms that we might have. Tremor makes our caloric requirements go up, as does dyskinesia. If you're moving all the time, your calorie requirements go up. And it can also make tremor and dyskinesia can also make it difficult to eat. So you just give up and stop eating, so you don't eat enough. Too few calories in and too much energy expended will lead to weight loss, and that can lead to malnutrition. Another thing that can lead to decreased energy intake and protein intake is dysphagia, or difficulty swallowing. Our vocal cords are muscles, and they are impacted by Parkinson's. They help with vocalizing and speaking and having other people hear us, but it also impacts our ability to swallow safely and swallow at all, and can lead, if we don't swallow safely, that can lead to the food going down the wrong pipe, as people used to say, not going into the esophagus, but going into the trachea and into your lungs and causing something called aspiration pneumonia. If you can't swallow well, you may decrease your intake. So how things that can help with weight management is, don't try to eat all your foods in 3 large meals a day. You can supplement with high calorie, high protein foods like a milkshake, or if you tolerate dairy, or other types of snacks or supplements, or even the things that are available in the retail, like Boost Plus, Ensure Plus, other supplements such as that. I'll go back to that slide. There are also ways you can, if you're having problems with weight management and you're losing weight, you can also, and you're not able to eat because of a swallowing problem or for some other reason, there is a product called enteral feedings, or tube feedings, that can be made available to people with Parkinson's. And it's not an all or none situation. The tube feedings or enteral feedings can bridge the gap until you're able to eat well again, or it can help. Lots of people have enteral feedings and they don't eat a lot and they live a very productive life because they're still able to exercise and communicate and do all the things that they would do to live a normal life. They just can't swallow or eat safely. So weight gain can happen also. It can happen with dopamine agonists like Mirapax and other things, and some antidepressants. It's quite common after deep brain stimulation surgery. It happened to me. I was not expecting to gain 20 pounds after DBS, but I did. And it's thought to be related to the decreased in energy expenditure because our tremor is reduced and dyskinesia is reduced. I had dyskinesia related to my carbidopa levodopa. Very quickly it came on, and so I was always moving and had an internal tremor, rather than an external tremor. So after DBS, I'm a dietitian. I know how to eat. I was exercising more than I ever had, and I gained 20 pounds. My doctor said, well, would you rather have not had DBS and weigh what you used to, or can you deal with the weight gain and reap the benefits of the DBS surgery? That answer was very easy to say, well, yeah, I'd rather have DBS. But use moderation in all things. If you want to lose weight, or you want to maintain the weight you have now, limit portion sizes, limit high calorie foods. You may just need to readjust your body image and think about what's more important to you, and just eat in a healthy fashion, and exercise. I've mentioned hydration several times. That means 2 liters of fluid a day, 64 ounces, 8 cups of water. It helps with medication absorption. It can help with blood pressure, and it can help you just feel better. I've talked a bit about swallowing issues. It occurs because of slowness of movement, rigidity, and weakness. Ask for a consult with a speech language pathologist or speech therapist. Be proactive. When I was first diagnosed, I got involved with LSVT Loud, and then Speak Out, where you speak loudly with intent, because that helps to strengthen your vocal cords. You may need to modify your food consistencies, consider tube or enteral feedings. But if untreated, the weight loss and malnutrition and aspiration pneumonia can all occur, and can lead to a rather quick decline in your health. So living well with Parkinson's, keep variety in your diet. Practice those, the healthy food groups, Mediterranean lifestyle. Add fiber. As men, we need 25 grams of fiber a day. Women need 35 grams of fiber a day. Actually, I think I got that reversed. But you need to get that insoluble fiber from whole grains, fresh fruits and vegetables. Consider adding the fermented foods that I mentioned. Reduce stress in your life if you can. Maintain a regular eating schedule. Don't take antibiotics for long term. Think about probiotics and prebiotics, or the foods that contain natural sources of probiotics and prebiotics. Stress can come in many fashions. There can be metabolic stress, physical stress, psychological stress. There's many different ways to help to manage that. Exercise is probably the best. Eat meals at your same time every day, and limit acid reducing agents like Tums and those types of things, because that can disrupt the bacteria and the makeup of what your stomach has. And I'm going to go back to that first statement I made. Nutrition and Parkinson's, it's all about balance. Life with Parkinson's is all about balance. Exercise, please get into some type of exercise program and try to exercise every day. Don't smoke or stop smoking. Just think about the Mediterranean lifestyle, and then practice mindfulness. Mindfulness, I went to the doctor this morning, my blood pressure was high, so I did my deep breathing and brought my blood pressure down by like 40 points, the systolic version of it. And so it was, I have a normal blood pressure. Meditation can be helpful. That's hard for me to do, but I try to practice some type of meditation, whether I'm walking and meditating or sitting and meditating the conventional way. Yoga can help as a meditation type of exercise. Practicing gratitude, be thankful for what you have, your family, your doctors, your guidance that you have. And then there are some guided imagery type programs that can help. So I'll stop sharing. And as I said, I can share my slides and I'll take questions.
So you actually spoke, one of the first questions we got, which you covered later, but he was talking about losing all the weight. Are there any foods that are best to eat to help gain weight, but not interfere with the efficacy of the PD meds? Because like you had mentioned Boost or whatnot, but is there something you would say? Because obviously you don't want people to just eat donuts all the time. But would you say there's something that you're like, well, it's a fattier food, it might put on a little bit of weight, for example?
Yeah. Like, we'll say if you eat foods that you like, I mean, don't force yourself to eat foods that you don't like, but maybe peanut butter and crackers or cheese and crackers if you want to eat dairy. Something like that, a small snack between meals, a half a sandwich with some type of chicken or turkey or fish on it. A milkshake, cottage cheese and fruit, ice cream. Those are all high fat, high calorie type foods that also have some protein in them and they're healthy for you. Put some berries on the ice cream maybe. There's no bad foods. So if you like particular foods, work them into your diet. Donuts every day, maybe not so great, but if you're 30 pounds underweight, a donut might help you to gain the weight back. And that can be helpful in the long term.
With the idea that a lot of people with Parkinson's have other comorbidities, when you were talking about the keto diet, wouldn't that perhaps be a bit harmful if there were comorbidities such as heart disease?
Yes, absolutely, because it's high. I mean, with heart disease, it's recommended that you have a low fat diet and you moderate your protein intake and eat more of a plant-based diet or carbohydrate-based diet. So yes, there's definitely problems with the keto diet beyond that it's not very palatable and that it's deficient in some things. It can actually harm your kidneys. It can harm your heart. It can help with weight loss, but it could well lead to weight gain depending on what you're eating and when you're eating it. So I wouldn't suggest that you go out and start a keto diet right away.
Someone asked, are there benefits to herbal teas?
Yes, herbal teas are like green teas and other teas. They can be neuroprotective. So yes.
I asked these questions in order, but this is like the best question I've probably ever heard. Is it true that the smell of fresh baked cookies give a small boost of dopamine?
Well, I think so. I don't know that there's any science to back that up, but if it gives you pleasure increases dopamine and in your brain. So sure, I would think that would be a yes.
Because you talked about dairy, is there any value to like almond milk or oat milk?
Sure. I'm lactose intolerant, so I use almond milk and or oat milk or a lactase-free regular dairy milk. So if you're unable to tolerate the regular dairy milk, then those can be helpful. Also, oat milk is pretty good source of calories and kind of a decent source of protein, so that can be helpful too. And they have some vitamins and minerals in them, and allows you to incorporate that into other foods that you might not necessarily eat if you can't tolerate dairy foods like cereals and milkshakes, that type of thing.
And you kind of touched on fermented foods. What are some of the benefits of them? Because also somebody else had commented that you really shouldn't be taking fermented foods if you're on Azilect or Razagiline. But could you talk a little bit about the fermented foods?
I'm trying to think about those particular medications. The fermented foods have prebiotic properties in them that or probiotic properties in them. That's why they're sometimes suggested. As far as medication use, there's the MAO-B inhibitors. Sometimes people will tell you that you can't have fermented foods with those types of medications. The MAO-B inhibitors that we take as people with Parkinson's are different from the MAO-A inhibitors that people take that have things, mental health illnesses like schizophrenia and other types of things. Those people need to limit something called tyrosine, and those are often found in fermented foods. We don't necessarily have that problem because there's an inhibitor there in the B type that is different from the A type of MAO. So where someone with taking MAO inhibitor for a mental illness or mentally like schizophrenia, that type of thing, they can't have aged cheeses, any of the high fermented foods that I mentioned, like kimchi and kombucha, those types of things. They can't have red wine. We would have to eat a whole wheel of brie and a case of red wine to have it impact us as far as our medications are concerned. So it's not so much as a problem for us as it might be for someone else, but still moderation in all things.
You talked a lot about gut inflammation. Are there tests for checking inflammation in the gut?
Um, I'm not aware of any, nothing's coming right to mind, but if you have symptoms, the symptoms would be like diarrhea, bloating, constipation can be a symptom of an inflammation in the gut. I'm sure there must be tests, but it's just not coming straight right to mind. I can look into that.
And then if everyone's gut behaves differently, do you think there's a better as far as like taking cinnamon on an empty stomach or with food? You kind of talked about if there's nausea, you might want some crackers, but to avoid mixing with protein. Um, do you have a
Well,
preference or you don't want to
yeah,
comment?
everyone is different, but only 20% of us, as I said, are impacted by protein being affecting the absorption of our cinnamate. It doesn't affect the absorption in 80% of us. So if it is, that's why I suggested to keep a log or a diary of how you're eating when you take your medication and when you have off time to see if that's an impact, and talk to your physician about that to adjust the dosage and all of that. Because if you're taking 5 or 6 doses of Cinemat or Rytari or whatever every in a day, and then you're trying to time that around your food intake, it's going to be really hard to get enough food intake to meet your caloric and protein needs. So it's always better to meet your nutrition needs first, and then adjust your medication dose accordingly. But work with your physician on that.
As someone who's been diagnosed for a while, can you just tell me a little bit about, you we kind of touched on that it was like you had a grieving process and then you sort of were like, pick myself up and, as a registered dietitian, how did you kind of start looking at your diet? Did you kind of say these foods make me feel better? Like, were you scientific about it, or you're like, I'm going to just kind of do my lifestyle and tweak it? What was your approach?
Well, I got really mad at the physician who diagnosed me at first because she told me some other things that just didn't make sense. Like I would be bedridden in 10 years. And I go, there's no way that's correct. So I was in denial for a bit. Bargain. I went through the whole entire grieving process backwards and forwards. But my motto, as far as a dietitian is concerned, is to just live your life, and that there's balance. It's about balance. It's about moderation, and there's no big need to run out and try every new diet out there to see if it changes my symptoms or the way that I respond to treatment. I did educate myself about Parkinson's from medically evidence-based research, and not going to every different thing that popped up on Facebook or whatever. And I didn't listen to people giving me advice that didn't know what I was experiencing, that hadn't lived what I live. And I know, acknowledging that what my Parkinson's is different from every single one of you with Parkinson's on this call today. But found movement disorder specialists that I can work well with. I found several over the course of my journey, and that we have conversations about how I manage my symptoms, and how I'm progressing, and what the best course of treatment is. They don't tell me what to do. We decide as a team together. And I think that's really important, to be open and not go in with your best face on when you go to the physician, to go in with how you really are, and keep a log and write down questions, and take someone with you always to your appointments. Because if you're never going to remember everything they tell you, then they need to know. Our spouses, our significant others, will observe things about us that we may say, oh, that's not really happening. They have more insight than we do into what we're living with. But I just decided that Parkinson's isn't that I am still Marty. I'm still the person I've always been. Parkinson's is just a condition that I live with. I try to live my life the best way I can with Parkinson's, and that includes I exercise more than I ever have. I'm in the best shape of my life, and don't drink enough water, but I try to remind myself to not get dehydrated, and just try to see positive in everything, and finding purpose in my life by talking with other people and trying to help them with their journey, using my experiences, not giving advice, and listening. Just being a listening ear has been probably the best thing I could have done for myself. So.
Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your story with us today. We're so grateful. We have a tradition here at PMD Alliance, our wave of gratitude. Thank you so much for everything, and I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the day. Bye, everyone.